How much are we willing to sacrifice in order to become our most beautiful selves? This is one of the questions posed in Mona Awad's new book, Rouge, and I'm very excited to talk about that and the rest of this book with you today. My name is Sarah, and if it's your first time here, welcome. If not, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I like to occasionally just review individual books that I either really liked or found impactful in some way, and I just recently finished Rouge by Mona Awad, and this is such a beautiful cover, and I was seeing a lot of people talk about that and the excitement of her new book for a couple months now at least, and so I'm excited to have finally gotten it from the library. It actually came much more quickly than I thought it would, and yeah, I have thoughts. So I've read all of Mona Awad's books, and I think that this is probably my favorite so far. Honestly, I was not the biggest fan of Bunny, and All's Well was all right. I read 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl when I was, I think, still in high school, so I don't remember it super well. I've not reread it, and I don't see that one being talked about too much. I think it is quite different from these next three books that she has gone on to write. So the basic plot of Rouge is we have our narrator, Belle. Her mom has passed away recently, very suddenly as well, and so she goes to California for the funeral. Once there, she meets a mysterious stranger and discovers this sort of, I don't know, elite spa that she gets invited to. And this is a spa near her mom's place. Her mom was a member of it. And you can very quickly discover that not everything is as it seems here. It's not a normal spa. It's a little bit weird. It seems a little either cult-like or, I don't know, deceptive in some sort of way. But Belle does dive into what awaits her there, and the story follows from there. It's also important to note that both Belle and her mother have or had an obsession with beauty. Her mother is described as a very beautiful woman throughout this book by Belle when she is both a child and kind of flashback scenes of this book, as well as her current self. And it's very clear that her mom had some sort of obsession with beauty, but was also probably a very beautiful woman. Belle has always kind of struggled with her looks. She, as an adult, is now very obsessed with skincare, and she watches these skincare videos on repeat. It's also important to note that she is half French on her mother's side and half Egyptian on her father's side, who has passed away pre the events in this book, when she was a very young child. So she is darker skinned than her mother, and that definitely also causes some sort of disconnect and feelings of unworthiness and not being beautiful enough next to her very pale and beautiful mother. So the premise of this book was super interesting to me, as all of Mona Awad's books are. I find her to be such a creative writer. All these ideas just seem to come out of, I don't know, they're just very unique ideas, I think. I mean, the overall message in this book is perhaps not the most unique, but the events in this book I think very much are. However, I'm also always wary because I never end up liking her books that much. Bunny, I mean, I know it's a bit of a divisive book too. Not everyone loves it, but I think the popular view of it is that it is a very good book. A lot of people did enjoy it. It, I think, is her most popular book. But yeah, that one is maybe the one I liked the least, honestly. I think there's a level of vagueness in her books where it's we don't really know what's happening. Is this in the character's head? Is this an unreliable narrator? Or is this just this weird magical realism type thing that's happening? And we're just sort of supposed to accept it in this sort of otherwise real world. And I don't know that I'm super into that. I don't think I need everything spelled out for me in a book, but when things are super vague or you really aren't sure about the narrator's reliability in this sort of book, I don't know if I'm personally super into that. Before I go into too many more details, I want to say that there might be some slight spoilers ahead. I don't really want to spoil anything major in these videos, but I might say something that happens in the middle of the book or something that maybe you'd rather not know going into it. So just a warning for the rest of this video. I might talk about some stuff like that. And in saying that, I would like to kind of talk about the sort of general arc of this book. And I found it very similar to Mona Awad's last two books, which I don't know if I love that. Again, they are very creative ideas, but they kind of go through this whole same thing in the execution of the actual story. Basically, you have a protagonist who is, I don't know, very shy, feels ugly, not very confident. There's something wrong in her life, basically, something wrong with her specifically. And then throughout part of the book, not quite in the middle yet, but around there, she either meets someone or has some sort of experience that is, I don't know, it's that sort of weird magical realism thing. That's probably not even the right term for it, but it's basically something that feels very otherworldly. You're not really sure what's happening. You don't know if this character that she met is real. In this case, you don't know if the spa is kind of a figment of her imagination. You don't know if some of the people she's meeting there are, or like the exact events happening are real or not. But she has this sort of like otherworldly experience, a sort of magical kind of crazy thing happens to her, and it's like a good thing for her at that time. She's like, wow, this is great. Then suddenly she's like, her head's in the clouds. She feels like she's on a very different plane of reality. However, she's interacting with other characters like they're still, I don't know, normal, I guess. She's trying to have these normal interactions, but everyone can kind of sense that something's like a little bit off about her because she suddenly feels so like free and happy. So she goes through this, having these really weird interactions with people who are like, what is wrong with you? She's like, no, I'm great. And then obviously there's like an inevitable crash when she realizes like, no, actually things are not that great. Something weird is happening, maybe something sinister, particularly in the case of this book. And so I just found that, especially in All's Well, that this really happened. And if I recall correctly, it somewhat happened in Bunny as well. And so it was a little bit funny and kind of strange reading this because it just felt like it was following this exact same formula. Wasn't sure if I was totally into that. Although on its own, the story was still pretty good. But I think the part in the middle, sort of where she's kind of like on cloud 9 or whatever, sort of dragged on a bit too long. And some of the interactions were very frustrating. And maybe that's because as the sort of reader, you know that she's not going through something normal. The spa is definitely not like good for her. Basically, like she does start to feel a lot more beautiful and confident. There are these treatments she's going through, and yeah, you can see that like this isn't a good thing, and there's obviously some sort of commentary behind that and what's going on. But to her, like everything's great. She finally feels like she has this beautiful glow about her, and she's confident. But everyone around her is like, "What is wrong with what you look like?" And like, or they think something's wrong with what she looks like. She looks so different and she's acting so strange. She goes into like this one shop that was owned by her mother, and she thinks she owned it or like works there. And so it's like a very weird thing for everyone else around her. So yeah, in terms of the formula, not like the biggest fan of that sort of repetitive formula. I think if this is your first book that you read, then maybe you probably won't obviously have recognized that or noticed it. But if you have read, especially All's Well, then you will kind of, I don't know, it feels like it was just very so similar in how things were going. So yeah, the middle of it kind of frustrated me a bit because the sort of build up, it was actually a little bit like truly like horrifying at parts. There are some like creepy details in here. In the first I guess chapter part of this is a flashback to her mom like reading her a bedtime story when she was a child, and then suddenly there's something kind of strange and ominous that happens, and I won't spoil exactly what it is even though it's very early on, but I was like genuinely a little bit like creeped out by it. And it sometimes takes me a little bit to like be creeped out by a book. They just don't scare me as much as like horror movies do, even like horror books or thrillers or whatever. But this one genuinely creeped me out. So I was really liking the kind of horror vibe that goes along with the sort of criticism of the beauty industry that you can tell like is very much what this book is about. And there are a few other moments throughout this book that I was a little creeped out by. I was a little like held in suspense. Again, a lot of the time it was like, is this really happening or is this in her head? And for parts of that book, it worked. There is, again, this is mostly in her flashbacks when she was a child and she's kind of playing in her mother's bedroom, and there's some things that happen there that I'm like, how much of this is in your head and how much is supposed to be happening? What is this like a metaphor or allegory for? And that's very interesting to me. It's just when I think things continue to be so vague and kind of go on, it's just not for me. But yeah, this book also talks about like a very contentious mother and daughter relationship. It is very clear that the narrator, Belle, is very jealous of her mother. And her mother, I don't know, I don't totally get her mother's deal. Her mom is always being like, you're so beautiful, like I wish I looked like you. And we don't necessarily, at least I wasn't totally like clear if her mom meant that, just because there's some things that happen later on in the book that maybe make you kind of think about like, does she mean that? Is she just saying that to make her daughter like feel better about herself? Again, Belle has a darker skin color than her mother. She does have this sort of Egyptian heritage that she doesn't really know much about because of her father's death. Belle is growing up in Montreal, surrounded by mostly other white people, and her very beautiful mother, who is not just beautiful, but very obsessed with beauty. And that is very clear. She seems to always have like a full face of makeup on, very much beautiful clothing, always like with other men. And yeah, it's a little unclear if Belle is actually like an awkward, ugly duckling as a child, or if she's just very insecure, which it wouldn't be hard to be super insecure when you don't see other beautiful people who look more similar to you, and you are again surrounded by like a beauty obsessed mother. But yeah, I'm really not sure like what Belle's mom was getting at. I don't know, like you can kind of tell that she did care for Belle, like obviously she's her mom, but she also seemed very uncaring and unkind, and I think she must have known that her obsession with beauty was also causing some issues in Belle as well, to have these, I mean, later on definitely have some sort of obsessions, but she kept at it. And yeah, I don't know how I feel about that with like the events that happened later on in the book. And I don't know if things like could have been more clear around that, but maybe it is just meant to show a very multifaceted relationship and how you can be like a caring mother, but also a selfish one too, and sometimes put things that are important to you, like your looks in this case, above maybe your daughter's comfort and like what she should be internalizing. Like there was definitely strains in my own relationship with my mother at different points in my life, but I will say one thing, like she definitely made it clear that beauty was not the only or most important thing in our lives. And I mean, I was definitely a little bit of an insecure teenager, and well, even younger than a teenager, about my looks, and to an extent still am, to be honest. But I guess having that message that it wasn't like the only thing, and being able to see like my mom not always constantly like dolled up in this like beautiful full face of makeup probably was better for me than having someone who was so beauty obsessed making me feel like, oh, I can only gain my worth from there, which is very much the message that Belle internalized. And so obviously this book is critiquing that. The very like ridiculous and otherworldly things that happen in this book seem to show like the sort of how out of control the beauty industry might be, and our own sort of relationships to it. Skincare especially has really blown up, I think, in the last few years. I'm sure people have always kind of like cared about how their skin looks, but there's been such a huge focus on it over the last few years with the sort of like no makeup look, and how skincare is like a huge part of that. And for those who are keeping up with the culture at all, you've probably heard complaints about like not even teens, but like tweens, like 11 and 12-year-olds in Sephora. I mean, mostly messing with expensive products, but also buying or asking their parents to buy them these expensive products. Like you see like posts about like 11-year-olds buying like Drunk Elephant products and retinol already. It's like, you don't need that. And having been a teenager, like we've all gone through these phases of like trying to be more adult than we actually are, and thinking we might need some of these more adult things than we actually do. But I think it is getting more and more concerning as these things are now becoming much more and more expensive, and also just so completely unnecessary to these teenagers or younger than teenagers. Like, did I need to be wearing makeup at 12 or 13 years old? I mean, probably not. But the makeup I was wearing was maybe like eyeliner and a bit of eyeshadow, not a full face with like foundation and concealer, and on top of that, like starting to use retinol as someone who's not even close to developing wrinkles, or maybe doesn't even have a lot of acne yet. And I do kind of worry, like, I mean, maybe these kids will also like learn from it as I did, and as most of us did with our own like silly little decisions and purchases that we made when we were younger, and the sort of things we begged our parents for that now we find like, why did I think I needed that as a 12-year-old? So maybe they'll also learn these lessons, and I hope that's the case. Be like, oh, ha ha ha, I can't believe I thought I needed retinol at age 11. But I do also worry that maybe there won't be a lesson learned, and this will just be like a huge obsession for these girls as they grow up and get into like adulthood. And obviously there's nothing wrong with caring about how you look or caring about beauty or makeup or skincare, and I certainly do to an extent. I do have my own like little skincare routine, and sometimes I wear makeup or whatever, and I do have my own insecurities for sure. So, and I want to like try to have less of them, so I do like to make myself look nice and to be happy with how I look. So I don't want to shame anyone for their like beauty routines. However, I think we should be a little bit critical of like, why are we doing this? Is this the only thing that matters? Why are we giving money to these brands that are very much banking off our insecurities? So it's definitely like a very convoluted issue. It's definitely a complicated one that we have to like, I don't know, it's easy to say like, hey, why are you spending all this money on this? Like, you're so beautiful. But then you look inside yourself and you're like, well, I'm not always confident with how I look either. I'm also spending some of my money on this. So yeah, definitely not the one to be the judge or like even have the final word on this. It's still something I'm like working through personally, like my own thoughts on it and my own, I guess, like what I'm doing in terms of beauty. But yeah, I just think it's important that we stay critical. And I think this book does present it in a pretty interesting way. I think you can kind of get that message from this book pretty well, the sort of overall, like what's it trying to tell you about the beauty industry, especially looking at some of the characters that like work or are in the spa later on, like who they might be representing. I won't go into that too much because that is a lot of the like later book stuff. But there's definitely like a man in this book who, again, you don't know if he's totally real or not, or if he's in Belle's head or not, like what's happening. But it is very interesting that this man has like such a huge impact on the spa, on Belle's life, on her perspective. And I don't know if that's like, if I'm just like reading this too literally or something, but I'm wondering if that's like the representation that men end up having so much power over how women view themselves. Men are definitely like, most of the beauty companies are owned by men. A lot of the skincare companies are owned by men, a lot of the bigger ones at least. And then obviously there is like are we doing this for the male gaze? Are we doing this for ourselves? So men obviously play a central role in how women see themselves, although I think things are getting a little bit better, or at least there's a little bit of pushback with that. Except for the fact that men still own a lot of these like bigger companies. But yeah, overall, I think the message about the beauty industry is very clear. However, there was a lot of vagueness in kind of getting to that I wasn't sure I super enjoyed. I did give this book 3.5 stars. However, I have been thinking about it a lot since I finished it a few days ago, and I think it's something that will stay with me. I might actually like be interested in rereading this book. I don't feel the need to reread Bunny or All's Well, honestly. Like, there are books that I feel like I didn't totally get, but sometimes that's like just so fine with me. Like, I don't care if I didn't get a book always, and I just liked it or didn't like it. But this one, yeah, I don't know that I fully got it in all of its aspects, but I am curious to maybe getting it one day. So yeah, overall, I mean, if you like any or all of Mona Awad's past books, I think you will probably like this one. If you just enjoy like her writing style, her creativity, I highly recommend it. If you haven't read any of her books, I do think this one is an interesting one to start with. I think it very much poses like a question for the culture that is really important and interesting, and she does it in, again, like a very creative way. So these are my overall thoughts on it. Have you read Rouge? Do you have any thoughts on it currently? Are you thinking about reading it? Is it on your TBR? I would love to know your thoughts on it as well. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like, please subscribe, leave a comment, share it if you would like. That all means so much to me, and I will catch you in the next one.